Morning, everybody. My name is Brett Chilcott. I'm the owner of Room to Grow, and the pleasure of being starting and hosting these talks for a number of years. This is actually the 18th year that we have been running these talks in various formats. And it's a proud collaboration between ourselves, Kirstenbosch, and has been fantastically supported by Strake from Straight Natures. So just a word from our sponsors before we get onto the introduction for Alice. Room to Grow, we're an exterior design and project management company that has been creating and designing outdoor living spaces in and around Cape Town since 2002. We offer a complete suite of landscape design, construction and associated exterior design elements to cater for residential, commercial and industrial properties. And you can find a bit more about us at roomtogrow.co.za, follow us on Facebook or on Instagram. Straight Nature. Straight Nature is the leading specialist in natural history publisher in South Africa, associated with the best-selling and most highly regarded field guides in the region. Straight Nature publishes full-color illustrated books across a variety of subject areas, including birds, mammals, reptiles, trees and flowers, as well as marine environment, geology, astronomy, general wildlife, and children's nature. There really is something for everybody that Straight Nature is able to offer us. It is my pleasure to once again introduce Alice. Alice has been very kind to be doing talks with us for a number of years, and it's always a pleasure to introduce her and to sit and listen to her talks. Alice is an environmental interpretation officer at Kirstenbosch. She is a horticulturalist and a botanist and has worked at Kirstenbosch for 30 years. As the interpreter, she communicates the scientific concepts and information about the garden and its plants and animals to the visitors through the signage. She says she tries to translate the complexities and the jargon of the natural sciences into simple, easily understood language and present it on the storyboards that you see around the Kirstenbosch gardens. Thanks to the nature of her job, Alice says she's often out and about in the garden and has been taking photographs since she got her first digital camera 15 years ago. So I'm looking forward to your presentation, Alice. Kirstenbosch, more than just a garden. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Brett. Sure, 30 years. It is rather a long time. I hope you're all bored stiff by my photos by now. Okay, so today I wanted to talk about what makes Kirstenbosch more than a garden with labels on the plants. So we all know Kirstenbosch is beautiful. It is in a beautiful spot. It was recognized as a beauty spot before it was a botanical garden, when it was a rundown farm. People used to come for picnics. We're well known for the colorful beds, rolling lawns and the beautiful mountain backdrop, and the color and the variety of all the plants that we have on display, thousands and thousands of species, and the beautiful rolling vistas and the towering mountain, and then the beautiful shaded dell, ancient ferns, good old Colonel Bird's bath or Lady Anne Barnard's bath, as the legend persists, ancient trees, and the beautiful reflection pond, not to mention all the relaxing places to come and have picnics and run around on the lawn with the kids, and of course the beautiful flowers and the birds. Breeding pears, flowers. It's just wherever you look at Kirstenbosch, there's always something to see, which is what we are well known for. Breeding owls. The label seems to have vanished. I'm sorry, guys. There we go. Insects, bees, carpenter bees, hoverflies, butterflies, beetles. And of course, we have our reptiles, which are the things like skinks, a little bit less welcome guests like the Cape cobra, and moles. Being a nature reserve, we have to put up with the moles, which actually are fine because they also perform a function, although they do make our lawns very hilly. And we have porcupines, which are a challenge to garden with. But all of this doesn't really make us a botanical garden as such. It's just challenges that not many other botanical gardens have to put up with. And we also have, of course, have frequent visits by our caracals. So what does make a botanical garden? This is what the BGCI have defined a botanical garden as: an institution holding a documented collection of living plants for the purposes of scientific research, conservation, display, and education, which we do. And then the scientifically ordered and maintained collections, which is, it's a bit more detail on what we do. Documenting, labeling, and being open to the public for recreation, education, and research, which we do pretty much cover all those bases. And of course, the origin of botanical gardens is something as well, which is a debatable point nowadays. We have plenty of evidence that we humans have forever, as long as we can remember or write down, that we've grown plants that we eat, plants that we drink, plants that heal us, plants that we like. And there are many, many stories going back to as long as we've been writing and telling, as well as hard evidence, as is here on the walls of the temples, where this is Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, and she was 1479 before the Common Era. And of course, water lilies, which I also was unaware of until I read up about them, is that the ancient Egyptians would cultivate these as cut flowers and give them away to visiting people. And for them, they represented the aspirations of humanity, from the mud and the slime into this perfect, beautiful bloom. And these are nymphaeas, the same one we have down here in South Africa. So right back in the days of Amenhotep III, they were cultivating plants for pleasure as well as for use. And there's also plenty of evidence that ancient people used to also go on collecting expeditions. This is Hatshepsut again, going down to the land of Punt, which is not actually hard evidence that they know exactly where it is, but it's definitely somewhere in North Africa. And they come back with plants, in particular myrrh, which is comifera, and frankincense of Boswellia, and sundry other things like the unfortunate lion and lots of ivory and things like that. So as long as we've been people, we've been going around stealing each other's plants and growing them for fun. And this is another Assyrian or Mesopotamian, a little more recent. The line drawing is a little bit easier to see, but this was the Gardens of Nineveh, which is in modern day Iraq. And this may or may not be, I think it's King Sennacherib, however you pronounce it, I apologize for my pronunciation, who may or may not have been actual hanging gardens of fable. But anyway, so here we go. Pleasure gardens, useful gardens, have been around as long as we have. And this is the monastery gardens, which is maybe more direct link to what we are today as a botanical garden, where monasteries would have little courtyards and things of useful plants and medicinal plants, edible and medicinals, herbals and things, which would then morph into the physic gardens, like this of the Chelsea Physic Garden, which were particularly medicinal plants, where people would study and then make them available to the hospitals as medicinal plants. But then with the 16th century and the age of exploration and Europeans spreading around and looking around the rest of the world, they'd bring home more than just medicinal and edibles. And they were brought back all these wonderful plants from the rest of the world. And botanical gardens then expanded to include ornamental and weird and exotics. And this is one of the oldest existing botanical garden in Padua, founded in 1545, and still pretty much the same today, with the same rectangular beds and ordered beds and things. So Kirstenbosch is really just the end of a very long and venerable tradition. And it's in a way comforting to know that we are just the end result of a very long and venerable tradition. So the monastery gardens and the medicinal gardens morphed into these botanical gardens. And then today, so Kirstenbosch is a relative newcomer in this tradition, only 110 years old, founded in 1913. But right from the very beginning, we have bucked the trend, and that where a lot of the European botanical gardens would look outward and go and fetch plants from elsewhere and then bring them home to grow, Kirstenbosch, right from day one, has been concentrating on the flora of its own little piece of the world, of Southern Africa. I think all the botanists that arrived realized pretty soon that our flora is unusually rich and full of species and diverse. So when we were founded in 1913, this is more or less what Kirstenbosch would have looked like back then. It was actually a rundown farm. And it was largely thanks to Harold Pearson, or Henry Harold Welsh Pearson, to give him his full title, who was an Englishman, Cambridge graduate, a botanist, who actually came out to South Africa in 1903 to become the professor of botany at what became the University of Cape Town. Back then it was I think it was called the Cape Town College or something like that. So he came out to South Africa, particularly to study Welwitschia. And I think that the previous picture is clearly his headshot. This is more or less what he would have really looked like. This was him at his botanical staff at the University of Cape Town in about 1914. Him on the top right. So he came to South Africa to get closer to Welwitschia, which was his driving interest. And he undertook, I think, 3 quite arduous journeys up into Namibia to see it in its natural habitat and study it. And he wrote the first scientific papers on Welwitschia, published in the Annals of Botany in 1910. So that he traveled there in 1907. And his was the first scientific treatment of Welwitschia. And it wasn't by any means his only interest, but he was definitely more of a conifer man. But he saw the value of a botanical garden in South Africa. And he was pretty much the driving force that got Kirstenbosch proclaimed. And in our centenary year, I looked through a lot of the old materials, and I found this rather unwieldy quote of his about setting up the garden and what sort of the principles that guided the layout of Kirstenbosch in particular. And I was very surprised to see that we have really quite well stuck to what he actually envisioned, even though I can't say that, I don't remember ever being taught this as Kirstenbosch. It's not like we have a code of conduct that we will have to adhere to when we join, but it really is pretty much what we do to this day. So to paraphrase, he's sort of saying that the landscape is beautiful and lends itself to being developed and landscaped and ornamented. And while in a private situation, that would be the way they would go. So you decorate and then you plant. Whereas for in a botanical garden, it must be the other way around. So the botanical garden is primarily for the plants, and you choose the place of where the plant goes based on where it will do well or where it will do best. And rather than bending the landscape to fit the plant, you sort of blend the plant into the landscape. And then of course, if it's a shady plant or a dry plant, then you make minor adjustments to make it suit its area as best as it can. And while we don't forbid artificial or architectural embellishments, as he called them, they are much less important than the plants, and their true position is as an accessory to the plant, and the plants come first. And as I said, I was just really intrigued to see that we have really quite well stuck to what his original vision was. So we work with the landscape, which is very good. Kirstenbosch, we do that. And we also work with natural stone, and we've kept to the contours pretty well. We don't have, and I think also it did help in the early days that they were quite, challenged in terms of funding. So we don't have the pagodas and the palladiums and things that maybe more a rich garden might have had in the early days. And we very much choose the positions to which the plant will grow best. And the plants do come first, or they hopefully do still come first. And we are very, very big on education. It is what we do. So in illustration, the cycads were the earliest collection that were established. A lot of them were collected by Pearson himself, and some of them are the original plants that he placed, and he chose the spot, and he was right. It has worked very well for them. They're still here 100 years later, going strong in the same position he chose. And you can see we use the cobbles and the natural stone, and the paths are all contoured. The aloes, they did try on the Kopi first, and they failed dismally, and then they moved them to the warmer north-facing slopes where they are still going strong 100 years later. And then sticking to the succulent plant theme, where it is too wet, all we've had to do is erect a roof to keep them dry. And then we've kept to the natural planting. In fact, Ernst went so far as to go and collect sand and rocks from the place where the plants grow, so they would feel right at home. So we really do take his it's just become the ethos of Kirstenbosch. So our mission and motto over the years, the sort of the core aim of the garden itself, is we grow, display, and conserve our indigenous plant life. Although the missions and mottos of our governing organization has changed over the years, but it's still pretty much the same thing. We've just now, in the last 10 or so, expanded to biodiversity, not just plant life. So now we also take care of the animals and the things that live among the plants. So back to what makes a botanical garden a botanical garden. Primary thing, of course, is the living collections and the plants. So the plants of Kirstenbosch, where do they come from? In the very early days, in the beginning of the garden, a lot of the plants were donated to Kirstenbosch because they were very short-staffed. I think they started off with like one gardener and Pearson, and that was pretty much it, and a ranger, sort of an estate manager. So in the early days, a lot of the plants were donated to Kirstenbosch, and Pearson also collected quite a few. So in those early days, and right up until the computer age, which was like the late 70s, early 80s, all the plants were entered in on a register where they would record that each plant is given a number, the date would be the year, and then obviously the botanical name, where it came and who gave it. And then they would give notes about anything relevant relating to what the plant, where it was or what it was doing. And then I particularly show this page because it shows Encephalatus latifrons, number 48, which is one of those plants that is still existing in the garden, one of our centenarians. And I think there's also, which I think the Podrania also exists, and the Crinomorii. They all survive to this day, which is quite remarkable. So then with the computer age, we switched to cards, although they probably had a card system before, but it was handwritten, but these are our computer generated cards. And what we record was more formalized on the database. And there's the Encephalatus again, that's why I picked it out, number 48 of 1913, still going strong. And also part of a botanical garden, you record everything to do with the plant or that particular accession or that plant. So where it's growing, how many times we propagated, where it gets moved into. So the plant recorder's job is never really ever done. And that's the Encephalatus, 1915, and then just the other day, still going strong. And these plants have also contributed greatly to conservation as a seed source, where we hand pollinate, collect the seeds, germinate the seeds, and then try and bulk up the species, because this is one of the ones that is pretty much extinct in the wild, thanks to human beings. So then also with the plant recording, we have labeling. These are display labels, but also information labels for us. So if you've ever wondered what that number is on our labels, that is the accession number. So this Cagelia was the 1092nd plant collected in 1931. The 678 is the tree number. We also have tags and smaller labels that sometimes little plastic ones that we also use, but the display labels are standard. And it was also intriguing to me when reading through the old literature, and peg labels as well. Those are tree labels. This is a peg label. And of course, the birds do use them as hunting perches. and bed markers, which helps us tell us which each bed is. So if you ever see them and wonder what that means, that is our working map, not the visitor map, which would be even harder to navigate by. So each bed is given a number and a name. So if you've ever wondered what we're talking about when we're going to Q3 or H3 or H9 or whatever, that's what we're talking about. So B3 is the big bed opposite the fakie beds, where the Cagelia grows. And I was also intrigued with the historics, is how labeling is a never-ending headache in a botanical garden. These were the labels that were made for many, many years. It was an engraving machine. That's a heavy, thick black plastic. So the guy would sit in his room and he would literally grind out the white lettering using, it's quite very noisy. He had to have things over his ears to keep he's not going deaf. And those were all ground out. And they do last remarkably well, in some ways better than the metal ones, but they do eventually perish and they get cracked and they get chipped. And sometimes they just start to, because they just touch them and they will break. But they do have a very long life, those ones. I mean, that is a good couple of decades old, that label. But even back right in the very early days, labeling was a challenge, because the label has got to be weatherproof, it's got to be mower proof, it's got to be weed eater proof, and it's not visitor proof, I'm sorry to say, because children do pick them up and move them, or they get knocked over, or people get them out, photographers pick them up and move them out the way and then don't put them back when they've taken their photograph. So the person in charge of the beds work is also never done. We're always finding labels, putting them in the right place. So yeah, labeling is a never-ending job in a botanical garden. So yeah, living collections. We have a large living collection at Kirstenbosch, and it encompasses the garden as well as the nursery. So some plants that do not really do so well in the garden, they might only be represented in the living collections nursery. Wherever possible, we do plant them out, but Kirstenbosch is quite a wet and soggy place, and not all plants are suited to the climate. But this is our collections nursery, which is not open to the public, appointment only. That is the Protea Terrace and the Pelargonium House. Propagation is a huge part of botanical gardens. We have mist houses, as well as potting benches and all sorts of things at the back there. This is the bulb house, where, because of porcupines and climate and soggy soils, most of our bulbs actually cannot survive in the garden. So Graham, who is the curator, he looks after them in his beautiful house here. And he does bring them out and show them off in the garden occasionally. I neglected to show a picture, but next to the tea room in those beds, he will bring out these pots and sink them into those beds to show off and then take them back. He has a system of pots as well as these raised beds. And it is quite a joyous place to visit in the spring. A lot of these are also from West Coast and difficult to find in the wild. And he has a large collection. The Proteaceae Terrace. Proteas also are very tricky because they are difficult to grow. They are very susceptible to fungal diseases. So Mashuru has a constant flow of plants through his section. And they do try and keep a few in pots as a permanent living collection, but even those have to be renewed regularly because they can sort of die on it, like in a week, they can sicken and die. It is depressing. Ericas, also, a lot of them do not survive outside in the garden, so we have quite a good reference collection in the Erica house. Things like lithops definitely won't survive in Kirstenbosch, so we have a large collection of them, and we did have them on display, and I think that house is in the process of being renovated, but we do suffer as well from them being stolen from public display, which is a problem. Lots of other succulents, not just lithops. It's a huge collection, wisterias as well. And this was the original Welwitschia house and the Pachypodiums, which have been growing here since the mid-80s. And now that we also do have the Welwitschia house in the conservatory where they can be seen by the public. This is the conservatory. So one of the biggest limitations of Kirstenbosch is our rainy weather in the winter. So a lot of our arid flora do not survive. So we've, over the years, have had various custom-built display glasshouse, this being the current incarnation. And within the glasshouse, Ernst has, he laid it out in terms of regional. So each bed is a region of our flora. At the Knarrsvlakte on the right, and then the Namakwaland on the left, bushveld around the Baobab, Little Karoo. This one is the Knarrsvlakte again. On the right is the Little Karoo. So as you walk through, you will see plants that are from those regions, and he even went so far as to bring soil and rocks from those regions. So he was very thorough. And in essence, all the glasshouse is a large roof to keep them dry, and it isn't manipulated in any other way other than a roof. And the layout is designed, I mean, the architecture is is natural cooling. So we don't have any motors and things to help it cool. It's very ergonomic and well designed. And the pitch of the roof is to maximize the winter light. And then the challenge is to keep it cool in the summer and not to overheat in summer. That's the Little Karoo bed. So this is also a living collection where sometimes, where possible, you will have the plants that can survive out here growing permanently out here. And of course, Welwitschia and the Welwitschia house. And then the Matthews Rockery is the outdoor arid garden, which over the years has become a lot more full, but they have to be able to survive the winters, which are not very many of our arid flora, but enough to do quite well out here. The Pelargonium copy, which was the first housing for the succulents, but the soil is too shallow and too poor actually for the succulents. So it became the Pelargonium garden, but it is actually one of the more difficult areas of the garden. The Pelargoniums do quite well, but they have to be fed. Back to the Pearson's collection, the cycads, which is in the same spot for the last 100 years. We have signage as well to try and educate the public about what they are, where they come from, why they're special. That's our very special seed production, which we use to bulk up the wild and trying to take the pressure off the wild plants by making plants available, which was, I think Mr. Winter started that back in the 70s. And to bring it up to date, we have the Dino Expo, which are these, probably extinct in the wild woody eye. It doesn't occur every year. But we have our Dino exhibition, which has been remarkably successful in getting people into the cycad garden, kids particularly, to educate their parents on what dinosaurs are. They have been rather successful. We also have living collections which are ephemeral, like the daisies, where they are literally every year we sow new ones, and Roger goes out and finds new ones and tries them out. But these all come from the West Coast mainly as our most successful. And they pair very well with the Phaecis or the Lampranthus and the Drosanthemum, same time of year, sort of October, late September, early October. But there we do struggle with the Phaecis. A lot of them don't necessarily survive our winters, so we have to plant them regularly. And the hardiest one is the one from Darling, which is the purple one, so which is why it tends to dominate, because the ones that don't survive our summer do tend to get crowded out by the ones that do survive. That is the Phaeci beds again. It is rather a lovely part of the garden, and in the spring it is really very vibrant. Our Fynbos walk, which is new in that it was only done in the 70s and 80s. Well, 90s actually. 90s, I think the actual Fynbos walk was put in. But it is a large part of our collection, and it's what people do come to see. It starts in the Restio garden, which are our Cape reeds. We have quite a large living collection. Most of them are in the garden, and they survive quite well. Protea garden, which is the bulk of the Fynbos walk. We have, of course, the pincushions, beautiful pincushions. But what everybody wants to see is the king protea. So we have to always have the king protea. It attracts school kids, visitors, modern and old, and tour groups. And behind there, you can sort of see by the end of the season, the ground in front of the king is absolutely trampled to death. So we try and move them around every so often to give that bit of the ground a bit of time to recover. It is what everyone wants to see. So we also have other beautiful proteaceae on offer, like the Paranomus, which is very unusual. We've got cone bushes, which are very weird, and beautiful silver tree, which is Kirstenbosch is one of its natural, it's part of its natural range. It is rather a special plant. Shining and splendid, as Linnaeus described it, and sadly very susceptible to Phytophthora. So we are in the process of trying to find out how we can stop what Trudy calls the biological bulldozer, that is this terrible Phytophthora that just literally, the sad thing is they die in fresh growth. So you'll see the plant will be happy and healthy and looking, and will put on new growth, and then come back 2 days later looking a bit sick, and the next week it's dead. It is very sad. It comes in through the roots, and it blocks the tissues that transport the water and the sugars, and they literally die within a week. But unfortunately, there is no cure. They tried all sorts of treatments. They were treating it with a thing to see if the plants that are treated live longer, but so far no real hopeful results. It seems that we are looking more at hygiene practices. They are currently doing a workshop to try and work out what our best approach is to try and limit the spread of this dreadful thing. Also on the up here is the Fynbos garden, which, because Fynbos is difficult to garden with, this garden is more like what a home gardener would do to garden with Fynbos and what the principles are. The Erica garden, which again, a lot of the Ericas are high mountain plants, and they don't really like Kirstenbosch, which is the heavy soils and the lower elevations, but we do have a few that survive quite well. And they're very popular with birds. So if you're wanting to catch the sunbirds and things, this is the place to come and stake out. Find yourself a nice red tube, and you will find a bird eventually in it. Also get these kind of ericas, which are more familiar to the northerners. Lots of tiny little flowers, but they are popular with the bees. They are beautiful, sometimes also a little bit scented. But the tubes are maybe the more stunning of the Western Cape ones. And the Buchu garden, which are the beautiful agathosmas and the fragrant oils, also very popular with the bees. Their best time of the year is winter, spring. And yeah, so that's up in the sunny Fynbos areas. And then the Arboretum, which is partly natural and partly planted, where we used, back in the 80s, they planted fast-growing things like Virgilia to create the shade atmosphere so that we could then create sort of a cultivated forest, which is looking really amazing lately. It's coming into its own a couple of decades later, when the older forest trees have now taken over. Ectranthus is the best thing in the shade, although there are other things like clivias and Scodoxus and all those things also do well. And then a recent introduction into our Arboretum is, I think, what Pearson might have called an embellishment, but it is also educational. But we have our beautiful wormslum, aka tree canopy walkway, which I'm starting a list of all the names it is known by. So if anyone wants to send me their what they think it should be called, please do, because it seems to be the most difficult thing to find in the garden, and nobody knows what tree canopy walkway means. So I've heard it called the bridge, I've heard it called the skywalk, I've heard it called the cobra, all sorts of lovely names. So do send me your favorite wrong name of our boomslam. I would be very interested to know. So this is our raised walkway that goes over the Arboretum with lovely panoramic views of our mountains, and it gives you a sort of a bird's eye view. of everything. It is really very special. And it has been very successful. Certainly has brought people into the Arboretum, which used to be like a non-visited space, a good place as a student to go and lurk. But nowadays it is one of the busiest parts of the garden. And our signage is really about what you see on the boomslang is the first wave of signage, and the birds that you might encounter. So then another part of our living collections are the, well, not so much a living collection, more of a educational opportunity, are plants that have a certain kind of use. So the fragrant garden has also is an old garden. I think it was first built, this one is in the 80s as far as I know, and it is also supposed to be a braille, although I'm sorry to say we're still working on the braille because we had a bit of a hiccup with our concept, and that we couldn't find the one crucial aspect that would help with the translation into the tactile world. So this is a sensory garden where we have plants that have fragrant flowers and plants that have fragrant leaves, and you are invited to move through and touch and smell as you go, with storyboards there that will explain why plants are fragrant, and what part is fragrant, and what we use fragrances for, and things like that. And the labels, which are unfortunately only for the sighted people, which was the problem that we're trying to overcome. Also a well-visited garden. And an adjunct to that is the Braille Trail, which is a forest-themed Braille Trail, where you go through and you will learn principles of what a forest is and what the people in the forest do. I mean, what the plants in the forests make up and how you can identify them. Useful plants is also maybe a throwback to our medicinal garden origins of botanical gardens, where ours, not just medicinal, we have medicinal and useful plants. So we have, and edible plants. So we highlight plants that you can use to make drinks, and plants that are used for healing, and plants that are edible, and plants that are used for crafts and weaving and all those sort of things. With appropriate signage and also warnings, because some people don't take plants seriously and they can sometimes be quite deadly. And it is one of our most visited and education moment plants gardens. I'm sure we've all been through there as school kids. The Waterwise Garden is where we try and explain to people that you don't have to lavish, you can have a beautiful garden that is actually doesn't use up all our drinking water. And our Garden of Extinction is quite a new one. I think that's 2006, I think I recall. We're trying to put the focus on threatened species and the fact that it is people that are causing the threats. So we have our extinct plants that are no longer here, ones that are heading that direction, the ones that are extinct in the wild, and the storyboards try and explain what we're doing wrong and what we can do to help or stop. So that is part of our educational outreach. So when you come to Kirstenbosch, and we have free guided walks, which are given on a Monday to Friday by volunteers. So you are welcome to join one of those walks and get an insider's view of the garden. Or you can just chill out on your own and do what you want to do. We also have pre-arranged walks, although that is Andrew Jacobs, who has retired. And I don't think his post has been refilled, but we could always make a plan. So if you plan ahead and phone ahead, and you can make an appointment and order and sort of organize a tour. We have lots of children programs. This is the Monty Walks, where they have kids coming in and these amazing ladies take them around and give them really lovely little adventure tours around the garden. Great fun. A nice introduction, get them when they're young. And then we have, again, the volunteer program of activities to do during the school holidays. And then we have our captive audience, which are the school groups that have to do these things. They get given these worksheets and they get shepherded through the garden. There are worse ways to spend a day, I have to say. Again, I have great respect for the people that do the teaching. Useful Plants Garden again. Or you can wander around on your own, and that's where you'll probably see what I work hard at trying to do. So my approach to the interpreting and the education is for me, it should be something that you might see and question. So I will put up signs or boards where I think it's interesting that you might want to know, or where somebody has asked me and said, what is this? And I'll think, okay, right, I'll put a board there. And I'm always open to suggestions. So if anyone has been wondering about what is it Kirstenbosch, and you just don't know, tell me and I will see if I can help or put up an information. If you find it interesting, I'm sure other people will too. So this is our breeding pair of owls, which in the last couple of years have forgotten how to breed, which is rather sad. They seem to be sterile. One of them, the eggs just don't hatch. So we're not quite sure what they're doing wrong, but they've come every year and breed in that rock. While they're there, it's lovely because you see her on the nest and him up in the tree. This pair are a bit more successful. They usually choose one of these baskets, and they successfully raised one chick this year. Last year they had 2, and they seem to be a fixture. So around about August, we start to see which basket they've chosen, and then so it's also rather a privilege to have them. So what I do with my roving storyboards is, when a tree is looking amazing and eye-catching, I will put a storyboard up about it. And then when it's finished flowering, I usually take it away. Sometimes I might leave them up all year if they are the kind of tree that looks like it needs information all year. So there again, the Cape chestnut also is one that gets a lot of attention. And then these are quite short-lived, but when they are flowering, they're amazing, full of birds and very pretty. And the clivia is also brief but glorious. And I do sometimes leave the board up to show what they look like. But sometimes I don't, when it looks a bit weird, and you just have this random storyboard about nothing in particular. And the Kigelia is also quite fun. Although owls don't pollinate very well, so the sausages don't get as big as they do in the low felt. Or you can just wander around and do your own thing, take photos, lie on the lawn, or just chill out and enjoy the garden. Have a picnic, run around. I think somebody with kids, I think country who was saying with children, as you walk in, she used to count to see how long it took for them to drop and roll, which is quite sweet. So it is an absolute wonderful place for children. And hopefully while they're running around, they are imbibing the love of the green space. So I've come to the end. Thank you very much. 46 minutes.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Alice. I'm always amazed you're always learning something new, no matter how much time you've spent in the garden, no matter how many times you've visited. Then you have a talk like this and you're still learning and finding out new things about the garden. That was fantastic. And I can second that about the kids at the garden. It is not long until they are rolling down the hills, which is often when you're doing gardens and everybody wants to create level lawns everywhere, and you sort of go, but hang on, it's so much more fun to have the shape and have the contours. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Alice, I see there are some questions in the chat box, so let's get to those and we can take it from there. So Mike, the question about the guided tours, I think Alice did answer that, saying that you said Monday to Friday and they're free. Are they on certain times? Or
you pay entrance fee only.
Mm-hmm.
They leave at 10, 11 and 2 from the visitor center.
That's at the bottom gate.
Yes, where the glass house is, gate 1. So just inside, there's a sign that says wait here, and that's where the walks lead from.
Fantastic.
Monday to Friday, 10, 11 and 2.
There we go, Mike. I think that answers that. Are there any large projects set to take place in 2023 or 2024?
I mean, like embellishment.
Just a question from an anonymous attendee. So any large projects or anything that's planned for the next couple of years? I
think we do have a list of things we want to have done, but COVID and I know we're always blaming COVID, but it has rather scrambled things, because for us, when the garden was closed, the weeds reared up and took over. And we are still a little bit in the crisis management phase of trying to regain control and find out where we were. So I'm not exactly sure what is top of the list, but we do have, I think we also have maintenance projects, like fixing the hut in the Useful Plants garden is being refurbished. The glass house, we are in the process of finishing up the crimnophyte house and tidying up the stone plants. And we're going to fix all the labels. So that is one, but that's not a new thing so much as just a revamping. But in terms of big projects, I'm afraid I'm sorry. I'm not really sure what the plans are, but I'm sure there are things definitely planned, but I don't know how far they are. And well, there's also talk of redoing the visitor center, okay. But that is a massive project, and how far they are along, I do not know. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. And then Mike Bruton had asked, could we say a little bit more about the Encephalatus woodii, which I think he thought we just skipped over. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, we have one of the suckers off the original Durban plant that we got in 1916. And it's in a cage because it is protecting it from people that want to because back in the 70s or 80s, somebody came in overnight and chopped off the suckers. So since then it was put in a little cage. So it's ready to protect it from people hacking off the suckers. And yeah, we use it in our breeding program. So they'll collect the pollen and use it to make hybrids with its closest relatives. But it is one of the Durban Botanical Garden has one of the original plants, and ours is a sucker off one of the original. But it's a beautiful old one. We've had it since 1916.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. So
Mike, I hope that answers your question or gives you a bit more insight there. And then another question from another anonymous person. What are the main jobs SANBI staff take on during the hottest months? For example, do you do propagation, seed collecting, or specific groups, or is it mainly general garden maintenance?
I don't think we have, our busy seasons are the planting season. So we always aim to plant in autumn. So the summer months are really watering and weeding, really. It's maybe our least busy time in the summer, because it's our, well, not, I wouldn't say least busy, but we our season is September. August, September is when we are all hands on deck. The planting is April, May for the winter. So all the annuals and things and all the fynbos, we try our best to plant with the season. So we will try and get them in April. Bulb collection starts waking up in about April. 1st of April, I think Graham starts watering. So winter, the rainy days, when it's rainy, they will bring in when the people that can't do the outside work, we will do things like the bench maintenance. So they bring the benches in, sand them down, revarnish. That's winter work. The summer is I suppose a lot of outdoor work, watering, weeding. But it's not a huge difference, really.
Okay. Thank you. And then we've got one more question here from Miranda Deutschlander. She says, asks, do you hand pollinate the Encephalatus species?
Yes, we do. They take the male cones off, and then they collect the pollen, and then I forget if, I think they used to use a wet method. And also, I'm not sure if he still does that, Pakamani, but that did work in the old days, where they would then mix it in the water and then pour it over the cone. And also Pakamani is taken lately to covering the female cones, because there is some concern that there are some airborne, it's not wind pollinated, but there are insects that might move the pollen. So he does cover them. And so when you walk through the collection, and you might see one or two with a netting cap on, that's to stop any random insects crawling in with the wrong pollen. But yeah, they do hand pollinate. Yes. Fantastic. And also they don't always coincide, the male and the female. So we might find that they're not always in sync. So they keep the pollen in the fridge.
Yeah, so you can store the pollen.
Yes, yeah. And use it to fatten a bit more the next year. I'm not quite sure lifespan it has, I could find out. But yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, I think I don't see any more questions. There's a couple of hands up, but they've been asked to put the questions in the chat box, but they're not. Oh, there we go. One more at the bottom here. The big pond was the big pond was rather overgrown. Tends to be, becomes land.
We've just cleared it actually. We have a patch of papyrus on the one end, and then some typha got in and got stuck in, and that wasn't planted. That arrives on its own.
Yeah.
And then it has just literally been. It's still a bit of a mess. You can see within the last month or so, they drained, cleaned, dug out all that typha, cut back the lawn. But I agree. I think we have been a little bit lax. I think our standards. I think we sometimes forget. One must keep at these things. What plants are terrible. And also, I know Pokemani has struggled, and we blame the geese actually, in terms of we can't seem to grow the blue water lilies like we used to. And that is something we're also trying to work out what we're doing wrong. But that used to be beautiful, full of the blue water lilies. And then we plant them, and they just don't grow like they used to. So I think that is, but yeah, the typha has gone. You can come back, it's safe.
Thank you, Giza, for that. Okay, I think that's coming to the end. I think the end is just to thank Alice again for that talk. That was fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for joining us from all over the country, from all over the world. That was great to have you all here. Our next talk is Wednesday the 9th of November, and it's Dr. Peter Carrick. It's a talk on ecological restoration in arid lands. So it'd be great for you to join us for that. And then just a reminder that the Kirstenbosch Visitors Guidebook can be purchased at the Kirstenbosch bookshop at a reduced price. And that brings us to the end of this week's talk, and we look forward to seeing you all again in 2 weeks' time. Thank you so very much.
Okay, bye.
Bye, everybody.